Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So, Hare Krishna devotees, this evening we're going to read or start reading verse 6. We may get through the whole thing because the purport is not so long. But let us see. So yes, first of all, let us read the verse. Drishtai swabhava janatar vapushas chadoshayar. Na prakritatvam iha bhakta janasya pashyet. Gangam basam nakalu buddha pena pankayar. Brahma dravatvam apagachati nira dharmai. Being situated in his original Krishna conscious position, a pure devotee does not identify with the body. Such a devotee should not be seen from a materialistic point of view. Indeed, one should overlook a devotee's having a body born in a low family, a body with a bad complexion, a deformed body, or a diseased or infirm body. According to ordinary vision, such imperfections may seem prominent in the body of a pure devotee, but despite such seeming defects, the body of a pure devotee cannot be polluted. It is exactly like the waters of the Ganges, which sometimes during the rainy season are full of bubbles, foam, and mud. The Ganges waters do not become polluted. Those who are advanced in spiritual understanding will bathe in the Ganges without considering the condition of the water. Yes, so the discussion is gradually developing, evolving further from step to step. We started back in verse 1 with the different serious problems, vacha vegam, manasa, krodha vegam, all these things, lust, anger, etc. Then we went on, verse 2, to discuss some other prominent types of problems that come to a devotee who's trying to practice or in the earlier stages generally of Krishna consciousness. Then in verse 3 we went on to some very positive things which must be cultivated to help us become nicely situated in devotional service. These are more for newer devotees. Of course, they're for everyone, but they're also more for newer devotees. Then verse 4 told us about different exchanges with different levels of devotees. Important subjects, so we don't mistreat devotees, treat someone who's more advanced than us in some sort of, disrespectful way. Treat someone who's junior to us as if they're senior, take advice from them, this sort of idea. Yes, so that was verse 4. And then we just discussed, of course, verse 5. And there, in quite some explicit, clear detail, the three main levels of devotees were described: Kanishta, Madhyam, and Uttama, and to some degree pre-Kanishta and people of that sort, in kind of Krishna-conscious but unusual Krishna-conscious situations. So now we're going on to focus more on the actual pure devotees, the very advanced devotees, mainly at least. The pure devotees that one must treat with the greatest respect and never consider them to be ordinary people and subject to the regular conditions that ordinary people are subject to. That was quite clear, I think, from the verse itself. So now we have divided this verse into three sections. It's approximate, but it often helps us if we sort of divide things into sections so we can see one thing, then another, rather than try and see everything at one time. Right, so Srila Prabhupada begins the purport by pointing out that Shuddha Bhakti, of course, is pure devotional service. It's not just kind of, ordinary devotional service, if you want to. It's not mixed devotional service, that's for sure. But pure devotional service, which is most prominently performed by pure devotees. So pure devotional service, which is the natural activity of the soul. Mixed devotional service is not the natural activity of the soul. I mean, the devotional service part is, but the mixture with some material things, that's something else. So then Prabhupada quotes very famous Bhagavad Gita verse 1426. Mam chiyo vyabhicharina bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, who doesn't fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and comes to the level of Brahman. Yes, so, we'll see how Prabhupada develops the discussion of this verse, the subject matter of this Bhagavad Gita verse, in the following paragraph. But let me just mention one little thing here. Is that here Lord Krishna is saying that one who engages fully in devotional service and doesn't fall down under any circumstance immediately transcends the modes. So, the devotees in general say that we are associating with and who are involved in Krishna consciousness, who are generally the best amongst all the devotees in the world, in fact. I mean, from all the different, divisions of the Vaishnava world. So, it is not uncommon to find, let us at least say it's not uncommon to find, that they will go through some sort of wave type of experience in their Krishna consciousness, sometimes up, but then sometimes down, and then up again. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it would appear to be at least shall we say, not uncommon that happens. And then the sort of the down occurs when usually it's caused by our material, old material consciousness. We've been in material life so long, old habits die hard, and something sort of comes up again. Or in one way or another, some sort of material interest increases its influence. And then our consciousness goes down, and we may find we're struggling a bit. But then, if we do fight the good fight, so to speak, struggle the good struggle to get ourselves together again, then we come back up. Something like that. Now, I don't know if you, anyway, you can just think about that if it applies, or to whatever degree it applies to you. But in relation to this Bhagavad Gita verse, applying the ideas, or not ideas, but the facts presented here by Lord Krishna, it can be argued that when we are doing better than we are sometimes doing, or when we're doing our best, yes, because sometimes we go through some wonderful periods, even if it's fairly brief sometimes, where we're quite absorbed in Krishna consciousness, and material life is kind of forgotten, at least to a significant degree. So, therefore, when a devotee is in such a condition, although, they may go down again after a little while, and that sort of phenomenon may happen from time to time, but at least when they're up and they're doing nicely and they're rendering devotional service and they're remembering Krishna and they're enthusiastic, etc., etc., then it can certainly be said that they're engaged at least in some type of pure devotional service. I should have mentioned while we were discussing verse 5, but we read how Lord Chaitanya instructed Satyaraj Khan and the devotees from Kulina on the three levels of Vaishnavas in terms of how they chant. And the first one was on the lowest level. Lord Chaitanya said, is just one time in his life, he says, Krishna. Then he's automatically in a special condition, special category. He's no longer just one of them, the regular, ordinary, conditioned souls. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada makes very interesting discussion there in the purport, or one of the purports right around there. Prabhupada explains that a Kanishta Adhikari, who, anyway, we spoke, I think, enough for the time being about Kanishta Adhikaris the last few days. They're sort of prone to have problems, and even though they're devotees. So Prabhupada explains that a Kanishta Adhikari may sometimes be a pure devotee. Now we might think, what? But you can read it and see. Prabhupada explains like that at least when the Kanishta Adhikari, or if the Kanishta Adhikari is quite steadfastly following the instructions of the spiritual master, then it's possible that the Kanishta Adhikari may be considered a pure devotee. Yeah. So then in terms of our Bhagavad Gita verse here, that this devotee who engages in full devotional service and who doesn't fall down under any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature, comes to the level of Brahman. So those, when any devotee is fully engaged and remembering Krishna and just enlivened and inspired in Krishna consciousness, and the mind is focused nicely, which definitely happens. It definitely happens. Then they can be considered to be in a liberated position. In a liberated position beyond the modes. I think that's what I would like to say about that verse. I mean, at least at this point. Prabhupada goes on to sort of kind of elaborate further. So now we read in the Nectar of Instruction verse. Well, wait a minute. Anyway, here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions avyabhicharani bhakti. Oh, no, sorry, it's from the Bhagavad Gita verse. Avyabhicharani bhakti. Avyabhicharani means undeviating. Vyabhicharani means deviating. Yeah. Interesting little cultural point that in old Indian culture, a woman or a man, a person who could not focus on one member of the opposite sex, in other words, their husband or their wife, and just, be settled like that, and not from time to time go off and take interest, like particularly some real interest in some other member of the opposite sex. So sometimes such a person who's unfocused in regard to the opposite sex is called a vyabhichari. Because vyabhichari basically means flickering many interests, this way, that way. You get the idea. So avyabhicharani bhakti then means it's not flickering, it's not going in any other direction, it's just going in one direction. Yeah. So this is Prabhupada is giving a type of a definition of pure devotional service. He's giving a type of definition of pure devotional service, which of course is performed by pure devotees. Yeah. So, let me just have a look here. Right, oops. Right, so now Prabhupada makes the point that in Krishna consciousness, we must change. We are here to change. We are not here just to remain the same. We're here to change from impure, vyabhichari, to avyabhichari. We're to come to the point of pure devotional service, or at least make our best efforts in that direction, and pray for mercy to make up for any shortcomings. So Prabhupada goes on now. We're still in this introductory part. It's the first 2 paragraphs. And Prabhupada refers again to the famous verse of Rupa Goswami from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanariktam anukulyena krishnanushilanam bhaktir uttama. Hopefully you remember, we discussed this verse in a little detail towards the beginning, the much earlier part of the seminar. And this is Rupa Goswami's definition of pure devotional service. Avyabhicharani bhakti, undeviating, fully focused. Or as that particular verse itself says, uttama bhakti. Uttama. Tama, of course, means ignorance, and ut indicates beyond. So uttama bhakti means devotional service which is beyond actually the modes of material nature. All of them. Yeah. So that Prabhupada refers to that because this is what we're talking about. This is what Rupa Goswami is talking about in this verse. Rupa Goswami is talking about a very elevated devotee, specifically. So a devotee who is anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanavritam, if you remember, no interest in materialistic religion, karma, no interest in gyan, impersonal philosophy, and no interest in anyabhilashita, any other type of non-Krishna desire. All those things, the verse says, are shunya. Shunya is the word for zero, including in modern day North Indian languages. And then, so those are the negative things. We don't do those things. But then what do? We engage in devotional service. We do everything for Krishna. We do everything for Krishna. We do things in a favorable way. And it's done in an unbroken way, ongoing. Yeah, so this is real pure devotional service, meaning of the highest order. Srila Prabhupada on a number of occasions said that all the devotees in ISKCON, and of course that was in his day, in the later 60s or sometime through the 70s, he said they're pure devotees. Anyway, I shouldn't laugh. I'm not laughing, actually. He definitely said it on a few occasions. It's a little more flexible type of understanding or concept of what's a pure devotee. Here, this is a very elevated concept of what's a pure devotee. Just like we mentioned about Uttama Adhikaris, you get lower level who are just coming from the Madhyam stage, and then you get the associates of Krishna. They're all Uttamas. Aha. So, yes. And then, if you do like that, Well, in fact, the first 3 paragraphs, I should say, the first 3 paragraphs are like an introduction, not just the first 2, the first 3. So anyway, so we shouldn't apply. Just in general, we shouldn't apply material conceptions. Prabhupada says, Krishna's devotee is not subjected to material condition, even though his bodily features may appear materially conditioned. One should therefore not see a pure devotee from a materialistic point of view. Unless one is actually a devotee, he cannot see another devotee perfectly. Yeah. So, yes. Sometimes, of course, the verse is focusing mainly on sort of physical conditions, the state of the pure devotee's body. That's specifically what's mentioned. But even sometimes the pure devotee's mind, consciousness, may appear to be a little unusual, a little extraordinary. Therefore it said, Vaishnavera Kriya Mudra Vigyeha Nabujaya. It's very difficult to understand a pure devotee. In fact, here's a very interesting point. If you read chapter, 19 of Nectar of Devotion, this is a discussion about a devotee on the level of prema, Krishna prema. And different characteristics are mentioned there of a devotee on the level of prema. And one characteristic you'll see is that the devotee on the level of prema cannot be understood or is very difficult to understand. Prabhupada sometimes would do things which some devotees at least would sometimes find very difficult to understand, or they couldn't understand, and they became doubtful. There's a very famous example, very famous. Sometime in the mid-70s, in America, the movement was booming. Book distribution was really big and growing. And more people were becoming devotees, and more temples were opening. And there was the what they called the Radha Damodar party, a whole lot of buses full of devotees traveling the country distributing books. So 2 of the leaders of ISKCON in America, Jayatirtha and Karanda, they were thinking, how can we develop things, develop the movement? We remember that, don't we? We remember that idea. How can we develop the movement? So it's very nice. It's very nice to think like that. But when you're not an Uttama Adhikari, sometimes when you're thinking about how to develop the movement, it's likely, at least sometimes, you'll think of developing the movement in some wrong way. Yeah, you'll make a mistake because you're not on that level where you have such a profound understanding of Krishna consciousness and the implications of related factors. So anyway, these 2 thought, yes, let us develop the Krishna consciousness movement by having all the ISKCON properties, the buildings, the temples, And there were probably at the time 50. And some of them, like Los Angeles, were worth, I would imagine, not less than $1 million. And we're talking about, 45 years ago or something. Now it would be a lot more. So they thought, let us get all those properties placed in one legal entity, one company, a religious entity. And then we can borrow money from banks, because the banks will look at all our properties and see, these people have properties worth whatever it is, maybe $20 million at that time, maybe more too. And so if they want to borrow 5 or 10 million, but they can't pay it back, we just take the properties and we don't lose money. This is how banks think. So that's what the devotees thought. Let us amalgamate everything into one legal entity. Borrow lots of money. Buy more properties. Buy more vehicles. Expand the Krishna consciousness movement. Sounds sort of like a very interesting idea, at least, or I'm sure some would think it's a very good idea, because this is what so many businesses do. They mortgage their buildings to get more stuff. Yeah, so anyway, these two devotees were thinking, right, great idea, let's do it. And they were about to do it when Prabhupada found out. And Prabhupada became, I think the only term you could really use would be livid. Do you understand? Livid. Livid means so angry, just like total anger. Perhaps more angry than he became at any time in the course maybe of his life. I don't know about that, but maybe while he was heading ISKCON, for those years, 12 years, while he was still with us, he just became totally angry and just chastised them. It was dramatic for them. It was truly dramatic. And they thought that Prabhupada, he comes from India, and they do things differently. In India, particularly in those days, in India, the great majority of people don't even have bank accounts. And so many businesses don't even have bank accounts. They just, the money goes in from one pocket out and then back into another pocket. So Prabhupada, he probably doesn't understand how these things work. So let's explain to him, and then maybe he'll realize, good idea, we can expand the Krishna consciousness movement. So they tried to explain to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada became more angry. Krishna, if that were possible. And Prabhupada made a specific point. Well, he made many points, actually. But there was one point in particular, is that if you put all the properties into one entity, and then something goes seriously wrong in that entity, like, some legal, we get sued for millions of dollars. That's what happens in America. People get sued for millions of dollars, left and right practically. So then if that happens, we may lose all our properties at one time. So Prabhupada said, best everything is separate. Plus, Prabhupada also said it's good training for the devotees to take full responsibility for their own center. Each center, those devotees take responsibility for their center. And not just one big entity with a few people at the top, sort of dictating to everyone else. And you know what happened, devotees? Well, I'll tell you what happened is it happened. It happened. ISKCON has, on at least a couple of occasions, particularly fairly recently, means like, 10 years ago, ISKCON was sued for more money than all our properties in America are worth. Yeah. And that was a drama and a half. So you see, Prabhupada, it's not just, that he's very spiritual, and chant Hare Krishna and read the books and tell people about Krishna. But Prabhupada was so tuned in to everything. Yeah, when I say everything, I mean like all the important things to do with organizing and developing the Krishna consciousness movement. Yeah, so, yes. So, but those two devotees, they were in great spiritual difficulty for some time because they couldn't accept what Prabhupada said. And they just hung on to that idea. He doesn't understand. Okay. So bodily defects, even like possible psychological kind of unusual characteristics. Like, that was one example that people might think is an unusual psychological conception about, the ISKCON entities. Here's another one. There was a great devotee living at the time of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, more or less, and also a little after, maybe into the 30s, I think, 1930s. His name was Vamsidas Babaji. And he, externally, a lot of the time, when he was an avaduta, means a very sort of otherworldly person, very difficult for ordinary people to relate with him, very difficult. So Vamsidas Babaji, he would talk to his deities. He had Gaunitai, he had a Gopal deity, and particularly there may be one or two others at different times. So one time, one devotee approached Vamsidas Babaji when Vamsidas was getting old and, it became difficult for him physically to move around. So one devotee, well-meaning devotee, suggested to Vamsidas Babaji Maharaj that why don't you're getting too old. You're getting too old to go out and beg food and, collect donations of things you need for your physical maintenance. I'll do that. Me and my friends, we will do that. You just stay here in your ashram and chant and look after your deities. So it was a very well-intentioned suggestion. Vamsidas, and the devotee said, we're sure that by Lord Chaitanya's arrangement, we will be able to collect plenty and you'll be fine. Lord Chaitanya will look after you. Vamsidas Babaji became silent, and now he's looking at his deity of Lord Chaitanya. Gaunata, he's looking at Lord Chaitanya, and he's silent. And suddenly he jumped up, picked up a stick, and moved sort of towards Lord Chaitanya, the deity, with the stick, and said, you try to serve me, I'll break your leg. This is avadhuta. This is avadhuta. Sometimes Gaurkishore Das Babaji Maharaj, who's in our parampara, who was also avadhuta, sometimes because there would be people who would kind of pester him. He was not into preaching. He had preached before, but now he was like a renunciate Babaji, just staying in one place generally and chanting, just like 150 rounds a day, basically that sort of program. So, but he became famous as a big sadhu. And when you become a big sadhu, and the Hindu people find out that there's a big sadhu just nearby here, then the people start coming. And, and particularly, they start coming and asking for blessings for material things. Just an interesting little aside on that point. Dinabandhu Prabhu from Vrindavan, if you remember Dinabandhu Prabhu from Vrindavan, he was telling me after the last big Kumbh Mela, whenever it was, not long ago, he told me that he went around and checked the places and all the different sadhus and spiritual groups, and there are just many, many of them, hundreds and hundreds of different sadhus and spiritual groups of all different types. And he speaks Hindi and he understands Hindi, and it's sort of mainly a Hindi program. So he would stop in and listen at these different people's places where their visitors have come in and are speaking to the spiritual people, and he would listen to what the discussion was about. And Dinabandhu Prabhu told me that at the Kumbh Mela, everyone means all the sadhus and all the religious groups. Dinabandhu Prabhu said, everyone is a doctor and everyone is a financial advisor. Do you get the idea? Means those are really the only things people ask them about. And the sadhus get into it and give them blessings and whatnot and collect a donation. Yeah. So anyway, back to Gaurkishore Das Babaji Maharaj, that he became famous. And so these people were coming to him. So in order to stop it, because it was a botheration, in order to stop them, he would do very unusual things. Like it said, sometimes he would eat out of a human skull. He definitely stayed in one ashram in a dharamshala. It's sort of like a very cheap hotel, or very cheap, almost too cheap hotel for pilgrims. So he stayed in one dharamshala in the toilet. And he lived there for at least months. And the owners, who were just, very nice Hindu people, the owners begged him, please, don't do that. But he insisted, either I do that or I'll just go somewhere else. That's all, simple. So they gave in, and he lived in the, communal toilet bathroom area of the dharamshala for months to put people off. Sometimes he would dress up, Gorkishore Das Babaji Maharaj. Sometimes somehow he would borrow some very expensive clothes and put on a multicolored turban, some jewelry. And he would sit on the veranda right in front of the house of the most famous prostitute in Navadvip town. And that house was on one of the main streets. And he would sit there prominently for the whole day. And as people would walk by, he would wave to them and shout to them. In other words, he made sure that he was noticed to put people off. And it, at least with many people, it worked, because they couldn't understand, what on earth is he doing? What on earth is he doing? Yeah. So when devotees become very elevated, like Prabhupada, that was not the only thing which Prabhupada did, which certain devotees couldn't understand. There were many things, and devotees would think, what? Why does he want us to do this? Or why did he say that? But after some time, it would turn out that he was right. So we should not underestimate these people, the great devotees. I'll give you, how about a classic example with Prabhupada? The moon landing. I think you all know Prabhupada's perspective on the moon landing. Generally, not always, but generally he said he felt it didn't happen. Sometimes there are instances where he says that, well, if it happened, then something, something, something. So it's not exactly that Prabhupada just ruled it out, absolutely. But sometimes he spoke like he did, and it bewildered some devotees. You may have heard of a devotee named Purushottam, who was serving Prabhupada, his personal servant, when the moon landing happened, if it happened. But anyway, let's just say when the moon landing happened. That was 1969. Prabhupada was in London for the installation of Radha London Ishwara. And the moon landing was televised live. And I think Malati, Devi Dasi, borrowed or rented a TV so Prabhupada could watch the moon landing. So Prabhupada was watching the moon landing, then he lost interest, And he had, I think, Dhananjaya Prabhu massage him, including massage his head. So his head was down and he was obviously not so interested. But Purushottam was extremely interested. And he was, when he saw Prabhupada was sort of, his head was down or he's looking somewhere else, Purushottam would give a running commentary. Now they're doing this, and now they're doing that. And Prabhupada got tired of it. So he told Purushottam that go into the kitchen and take over the cooking of lunch from Malati. She was cooking. Oh, Purushottam wasn't happy about that, but anyway, he went and took over the cooking, and it was an old British gas stove. And, they're old, they're really old, and they fall to pieces gradually, of course. And sometimes they explode, and people can be killed even. As he was cooking, the old gas stove exploded. And he came staggering in, sort of, a little disoriented, with black soot from which the stove had been full of, black soot over his head and his face. And as he came in, Prabhupada looked at him and said, "Aha, Purushottam has just returned from the moon." Oh my God. Anyway, Purushottam, I don't know how long after, but maybe a year or two, or maybe less also, he left Krishna consciousness because he just had too many doubts, including about the position of Prabhupada. So I said that the first 3 paragraphs are what I'm saying is a type of introduction. And they're kind of different from the other parts which we'll go on to tomorrow. But Prabhupada, in the 3rd paragraph, he makes a kind of a slightly unusual presentation. He quotes Bhagavad Gita 9:30. It's right there if you've got your book. Api chet sudaracharo bhajate mam ananyabhak sadureva samantavya samyagvyava satohi sa. Well, Prabhupada gives sort of a paraphrasing there, that even if a devotee sometimes seems to engage in abominable activities, he should be considered a sadhu, a saintly person, because his actual identity is that of one engaged in the loving service of the Lord. He shouldn't be considered an ordinary human being. Generally, this is applied to not to great pure devotees like Prabhupada, Gorkishore Das Babaji and company. Because normally, and not just normally really, but they don't do abominable things. Abominable is not just ordinary bad, it's really extreme bad. So they don't do these things. But neophyte devotees, some of them sometimes do. So this verse is saying that if some devotee who we would normally take to be, certainly not a very advanced devotee, actually does something, not just something that's difficult to understand, but something which is really wrong, abominable, but they remain engaged in devotional service. That's their determination, that despite the problem, I'm continuing, and I'm going to rectify myself. And indeed, in the next verse, Krishna says that Shipram Bhavati Dharmatma, that by Krishna's mercy, the person does become rectified. So in the meantime, though, the person should be considered a saintly person on the basis of their determination to remain a devotee and continue as a devotee, even though they may have done something, that they really shouldn't have done, which is not so much to apply to the great devotees who are being described. Yeah, but still, anyway, it's an interesting consideration in a general sense, and therefore Prabhupada includes it, that no one should criticize the bodily defects. Well, that's bodily defects of a pure devotee. If there are such defects, they should be overlooked. What should be taken into account is the spiritual master's main business, which is devotional service, pure service to the Lord. So again, we are talking about that sort of devotee, not just your sort of regular devotees. If something unusual happens, even if somehow something goes wrong, but they must be considered saintly and never be derided or really criticized like that. Okay, devotees, so we'll go on tomorrow, and I think, well, of course, as we say, we'll see how it goes, and perhaps we'll try and finish the purport. But the next verses are talking about, the next 3 verses really, are talking about the use of the title Goswami, rightly and wrongly. Anyway, we'll go on to it tomorrow. For the time being, thank you very much for your attention. Srila Prabhupada ki. No. Okay, you can now. Because yesterday, anyway, turn it off. Just when I was saying Ki Jai or something, you came into the picture. Oh. Yeah, so you got to wait. Okay, devotees, Hare Krishna. See you later. Oh, look, we just used up the hour. 22 seconds left. Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Aha. Well. Okay. All right, devotees, Hare Krishna, Hari Bol. See you tomorrow. And of course, we're trying to give Bhagavatam class tomorrow too. So we could see you at 7:30 for that. Otherwise, Hare Krishna, Hari Bol.